As the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains say, Ninamani, which is a way of saying, hello, how are you and welcome. To me, welcome to country and acknowledgement of the Indigenous people is really, really important. If you read the little blurb about me, one of the things that I do is activism for the Palestinian human rights cause. And it's not just Palestine. Like, we've got Ukraine happening at the moment, and you can see all the civil wars happening in Africa and so on. And it's such a common thing that people have their land taken away from them. And so although it was something that happened more than 200 years ago, it's something that's happening in the present. And I think it's really, really important that we do acknowledge country. Our first speaker this afternoon is Tony Hill, who, with his partner or wife Jenny, farms a property at Mount Fairy near Queanbeyan. They run cattle and grow garlic to sell and to give away to their friends, which I think is really lovely. When they moved there in 2009, it was degraded land following the millennial drought and years of sheep farming. They've been restoring the land using holistic management principles, a subject which Tony teaches about in TAFE. He is the founder of Land to Market Australia, which incorporates ecological outcome verification, which I look forward to hearing about. So please welcome Tony.
After lunch on the second day of a conference, it's got to be almost the worst gig ever, but let me see if I can make my way through. I wanted to start by just expressing my gratitude to Shane for his very genuine welcome to country that he gave us yesterday. I've been aware of Shane for a while and had the opportunity to talk to him a couple of times, and every conversation with Shane is a great opportunity for learning. So I really appreciate that. And I still struggle to get my head around this, but how, given everything that's happened, all the terrible experiences, we can still get a genuine welcome to country from First Nations people just amazes me. So I think that's impressive. Now I've got a confession that I don't really have a script for this talk. So I've not got much idea of what I'm going to say, and we'll just have to make our way through and see if it works out. So I hope you bear with me. If we get lost, I've got some slides here, so maybe that'll draw us back onto this theme. But I did want to say thank you to Stuart Hill, who's sitting up there in the audience, for a few things, really. One was that I think Stuart was probably more confrontational with you than I'm going to be. So I'll be a bit softer on you, perhaps, than he was. So that's good. Secondly, I was very impressed to see the emphasis that Stuart gave to the concept of holism. And this is very tricky because it's not comfortable territory for everybody. How do you think in a global sense about all the things that are involved in a holistic context? And yet we have to move there. We have to move there. So thank you, Stuart, for that. And lastly, I'm also grateful for Stuart mentioning Einstein and that quote that you probably all know, which I'm going to badly paraphrase, but it's something along the lines of, if you keep banging your head against the brick wall and expect a different outcome, then you're pretty mad. All right. Now, this is an auspicious hall. I've been in it a few times and I've never stood up here, so excuse me if I'm a little bit nervous by that. But this kind of command and control structure that's going on here is not very friendly to what I'm about to do. And so in the absence of this script that I need for my talk, I usually rely on the audience to kind of guide me along and see how we go. So if you'll help me out and bear with me here, and that spotlight is right in my eyes, but I'd just like a bit of audience participation from you at the outset. And it's only a show of hands, so it's not very challenging. But if you think in yourself now, how comfortable do I feel, both emotionally and physically right now? Can you raise your hand, please? Are you feeling comfortable right now, emotionally and physically? Thank you very much for that. That's very helpful. I hope we can come back and revisit that later on. All right. So my journey with some of this stuff began in the early 1970s, and I was part of an intake in 1973 or 4, I think it was 3, of Economics 101 at ANU. Cheer. And I sat through those initial lectures, and what did I receive? Of course, I received the grounding in economics, which was the all too familiar supply and demand curve. Everybody must know it. It's got a couple of lines that go like that. And as you get more price, you get more supply and less demand. And then I met assumption number 1. What is assumption number 1? Perfect information by the participants in the market. And what are we currently lacking? Our business, our whole economic life struggles to get any sort of information. And I hope by the time we get to the end of this little journey here, that you see the relevance of what I'm trying to do with land to market and ecological outcome verification. Because what we've heard over the last few days, and boy, I'm using up about half my time and I haven't even got into the slides yet, but what we've heard over the last day and a half is a lot of stuff about the problem. And getting people to be interested in and address the problem, that's been a huge challenge. There's many people who wanted to deny that situation. But what we've not heard a lot about is where do we go from here? What do we do next? How do we do this? How do we go forward? I hope I can help. So this conference asked, can we feed ourselves and not destroy the planet? What I want to ask is, how can we feed ourselves and not destroy the planet? So moving on, a bit of adjustment there. Or to eat or not to eat, that is the question. And where does carbon fit into this? We've heard the carbon word so many times. And forgive me this slide, plenty of experts in the audience. I'm not an expert on carbon, but I've got a slide that tells a story and I hope you'll bear with me. And I start with that person. So baby boomers in the room, who is he? Thank you very much. Anybody not a baby boomer in the room? Anyway, so I just managed to Google this video of him explaining why 40 years ago, so that's 1980, he became a vegetarian. And I've probably mischaracterised Paul McCartney's view on this because in that video, he explains it was an ethical decision, a response to animal welfare. And he didn't mention one crucial thing. So he had the ethical response, but many people use this phrase, stop eating meat to save the planet. And I couldn't disagree with that perspective more strongly. And here's why. So you've seen graphs like this, you know, talk in, talk out here. That usually gets people's attention. And I pulled this graph, which is the emissions by sector graph. And something that we're told by the group who talks about this stop eating meat to save the planet is that if you reverse the emissions by livestock, you will have a big impact. And I've got to say that I think that's quite doubtful because that's the slice of the pie that's attributed in that graph to livestock. What about those other big slices? So I think maybe not. I actually smell a rat in that argument. So I'm saying carbon needs to be seen in its proper context. So here comes the buzzword, regenerative. We've heard it a lot. The name of the conference is sustainable, but I'm asking, do we need to be sustainable or do we need to move into this regenerative world? And I'm relying on the Savory Institute here and their perspective, which says that we've got degenerating, we've got sustainable at the fulcrum of the thing, and then we need to move into this regenerative world to take us away from degrading soils, loss in biodiversity, loss of water, access to water. So that's my perspective. And just in case you thought that my talk was going to be all about good news, I do have a few challenges for you. There's the one that I'm really interested in. 19 Australian ecosystems already collapsing past the tipping point, according to those authors. What does it personally mean to be in the middle of a collapsing ecosystem? What does that mean? Does that mean that you can still trip down to the supermarket and get your plastic wrapped food without any problems? I did go to South Australia, to Port Augusta, and participated in the South Australian Arid Lands Pastoral Field Day. I had to do a lot of research on where the arid lands might be, and particularly what it meant to be in the rangelands. Would you believe in 1999, the Joint Ministerial Councils, the ANZCO, said that there were significant areas of the rangelands being degraded. Government officials, government ministers signed up to that statement in 1999. That's 30 years ago. Is that a warning sign? Then we've got our ecosystem collapse with the friends Bergstrom and all. And then we've got, of course, the mega fires, which we've nearly forgotten, as we've got floods and we've had droughts. We've got the climate issue and, of course, pandemics. And Alex Havery has exhorted us to start asking the question, are we trying to treat the symptoms or can we get to the root cause of this? I'm not going to answer that question today, sadly. So where are these rangelands? I pulled off that picture. Turns out that boundary of the yellow area is quite friable. You know, it moves around depending on climate, but that's effectively 75% of Australia. And ANZCO says 30 years ago, it had big problems. So how can we tell if farming can be truly regenerative in this context? And we have a breakthrough. The breakthrough is called ecological outcome verification. And in my 20 years career with the Australian government, I went through the Department of Finance training courses, and they taught me exactly what an outcome is. So I'm very familiar with the word outcome. I'm pretty familiar with the word ecological. And the thing that I'm really celebrating is having spent about 20 or 30 years with the science and research community, at times with Julian, who's following me this afternoon. In that period of scientific research, I very rarely heard the term ecology. There's a lot of stuff going on about genetics, DNA, all those sort of fancy technology stuff, and minimal stuff about ecology. And one of the few research centres for that was the CRC for freshwater ecology. Julian, remind me. Peter Cullen. Peter Cullen, a landmass person in our environment. So what can we do with this ecological outcome verification? Well, we can verify, use robust monitoring and verify whether the ecological health of farmland is improving or not. An absolutely crucial question. The opportunity is to safeguard biodiversity, have healthy ecosystem processes at the same time as prosperous agricultural production. Now, that concept should send shockwaves through the Australian community, because our attitude up until this point, as translated through the political system, has been to say that to safeguard biodiversity, we need to put a fence around it. We need to ring it off and protect it from a whole bunch of other stuff. Now, if we keep on doing that, how much of Australia is going to be left for agricultural production if we're truly committed to biodiversity? So can we have these two things at once? Yes, we can, is my answer. And so we get agricultural production and the holy grail, this increasing soil carbon. So ecological outcome verification has been joined up in a magic relationship with a thing called land to market, which is a consumer branding exercise. I'm coming back to my economics 101, the assumption, perfect information. In this situation, we can give businesses and consumers crucial, robust information to inform their decisions about which products they buy, which food products, which fibre products. Here it comes. This is now quick drinking because we're going to go through these slides pretty quickly. This is about verification of things. It's not a certification program. It's not an accreditation program, and it's not auditing. It's information for consumers, businesses, and farmers. It involves annual monitoring. It requires limited resources, but we do have to put people on the ground. This is not a remote sensing solution. We have to put people out there to see what's happening. So they're accredited people. It's composed of annual short-term monitoring and long-term monitoring of lagging indicators every 5 years for those technically minded among you. Short-term monitoring involves visual assessment of 15 indicators. You'll see them in a minute. And we can calculate an ecological health index and a percentage performance rating for 4 ecosystem processes. Sadly, not the 5th one that Charlie Massey has introduced into our thinking. And then that's supported by long-term monitoring of the lagging indicators to see whether they're all tracking in the right direction and whether the short-term monitoring is telling the right story. So there they are, 15 indicators, nicely colour-coded in our table to be able to show farmers where the pressure points are, which paddock, which site, and which indicator is causing your score to decline. Ultimately, we then get that percentage rating of the various ecosystem processes and ultimately a trend number, which leads to then verification of that farm for that year, which is the crucial information for the consumers and businesses. So it's a new brand. When I first met the word brand, I thought, nah, this is in the realm of disreputable real estate agents and used car salespeople. But since then, I've really got in touch with brand. And brand is extremely meaningful for us. We trust brands. We would go back and buy that brand of car if we liked it again and again and again. And the companies trade on that. Absolutely. So why can't we have a recognisable brand for verified agricultural produce? And the seal is then the proof of the pudding. Easily recognisable on the shelf for an instant purchasing decision. We've tested this with consumers. They respond positively even if they don't know very much about it. And the test would be, and we come back to our supply and demand curve, the test would be if they perceive that product to have a 25% price premium built into it, would they still buy it? Now everybody goes, oh, nobody can afford to do that sort of stuff. But people can, and people do, if the branding is correct, if the information that they're making that decision on is strong, if the message is strong. And the good news is that we've already engaged with a bunch of businesses in Australia, and that group of international businesses lined up by the Savory Institute has grown by 300% in the last 12 months. Businesses are perceiving this now as a commercial opportunity. What does that mean? That means for the first time, we get a crucial money flow in the economy engaged with ecological health. What a connection to make. So here's a key example of how this is working right now, and I am currently quite nervous about whether we can deliver the performance indicators for this project, but Saviour Institute has found funding that will double our number of ecologically verified properties in Australia over the next month. And then it will continue to do that for 5 years. I just wanted to have a shot at the natural capital community, and I'm sure they're sitting in the audience. In my experience of this debate about carbon, many people have come to that debate thinking of carbon as if it was a commodity. How can we sell carbon and increase the farm balance sheet or profit and loss statement? And if you think about carbon in that way, I predict, at least as a community, we are bound to fail, because you will have carbon that is not connected in a holistic sense to all the ecological processes that are depending on that carbon. How do we get in that circumstance to the holy grail of the levels of drawdown that would balance out the industrial emissions? We can't do it without a holistic perspective. So carbon trading treats carbon as if, in economic terms, it was a stock. And just earlier this morning, we heard about, getting the less labile elements of the carbon structure into the equation. Why don't we take them all? Why don't we treat them as if they were a flow, as part of a process that's going on? And the process is keeping our pastures healthy, keeping our planet healthy, and keeping our people healthy. So EOV is focused on all those elements of the ecosystem processes around the carbon, and we can go and measure the carbon as well, but it's a lagging indicator. The visual assessment ones will tell you straight away. And just watch that workshop we're going to do at the Carbon Farmers of Australia coming up in May for some more news about how farmers can get into that game. And the last one I'll do is that everybody's heard the word Lismore in the last week or so. We know how bad the situation has been for the residents of Lismore, and it's not just the ones on the floodplain, it's also the people on the highlands. We were engaged in June last year by Lismore City Council to create, wait for it, a landscape hydration index. There has never been one. You can't Google and find a landscape hydration index. So how do you solve the problem? And why does Lismore want to know about the hydration of their landscape? Can anybody answer that question in the audience? Have they got a problem with water in Lismore? And what is their problem with water? Too much water, year in, year out. But what happened to Lismore and its region in 2019? The whole place dried out. And what happened then? It caught alight. A big shock for the Lismore community, absolutely. So we were commissioned to develop this index. We have done so. The final report is being finalised right now by the end of this month, and I'm advised that it will be available as a public document on the Lismore City Council website for anybody who wants to read it. The body of that report, I can tell you now, is north of 50 pages. It's solid reading. It embeds the EHI, our EOV process, in a solid background of hydrology. A fascinating report. I'll just give you one number out of this. That last one. Discharge off the baseline site in a situation of high flow, 376 times the standard for coliforms. That's not a warning sign. What is? So I just leave you with this thought. Can we buy our way into a healthier Australia? Just one more thing. Show of hands, who in the audience is now still feeling emotionally and physically comfortable? I think it's gone down.
We have time for just one question. No.
They're not comfortable.
They're not comfortable. Oh, here's one.
We've got one.
Over this one.
Thanks, Tony. I feel one of the problems with this whole measuring regenerative agriculture is there's been a plethora of different schemes. So how do you see us as a society coming towards to have a common scheme that's recognised by governments? I think there's a United Nations program that's looking at this. The Wentworth group of scientists looked at this. There's an outfit called Accounting for Nature that's looking for this. How do we bring all of this together?
I know that slide went past pretty quickly. This is not a certification, not an accreditation, and it's not auditing. So it is very different, and it is the only one with that crucial word outcome in the name of it, because it is focused on outcomes. And so what that means in innovation terms is it leaves the farmer free to make their own decisions in their own context about how to manage their farm. It doesn't say you've got to go out and do pasture cropping, or you've got to do holistic planned grazing on a Sunday, or it doesn't say any of those things about their management. It just assesses the outcome and then sends that information back to the farmer and then out to the business and the consumer community so they can make the decisions.